How's your flight, darling?
Really good, Mama.
I never knew she's a multi-billionaire. And why does that child look like me?
CEO met his ex at the airport holding a baby, unaware that the child was his. Esteemed viewers, welcome to Luxurious True Life Stories. Please like and subscribe for more captivating luxury true stories. Let's get into the story. Cynthia Benson stood outside the glass gates of her father's mansion with a single suitcase and a calm face that hid a lifetime of expectations. Behind her stretched acres of polished gardens, marble fountains, and a life planned before she was even born. Victor Benson had already decided her future, business alliances, wealthy suitors, and a corporate position waiting for her signature. But Cynthia wanted something money could not purchase: sincerity. Her father's voice echoed from the entrance hall, firm and protective, reminding her the world treated rich women like prizes, not people. That was exactly why she was leaving. She had watched too many smiling men stare at her surname instead of her eyes. Every relationship she ever attempted turned into negotiation disguised as affection. So she removed the name Benson from daily life and kept only Cynthia. No drivers, no cards linked to the family accounts, no security teams, just a modest apartment she secretly rented weeks earlier. By sunset she was wearing a cafe apron instead of designer clothing, tying her hair back while memorizing drink orders. Customers ignored her, brushed past her, complained about sugar levels and waiting time. For the first time in her life, no one was impressed. She walked home tired, feet aching, but strangely satisfied. If someone ever loved her now, it would be for who she truly was, not the empire she came from. Across the city, Kingsley Jeremy ended a call that had lasted nearly 3 hours, his voice steady until the screen finally went dark. The boardroom emptied slowly, but the pressure remained. He had just secured a major expansion contract, the kind that could double his company's value or destroy it overnight. Success had followed him for years, yet peace never did. Responsibility sat heavier than victory. His life had not begun with polished floors and private offices. After his father's death, Kingsley became the provider while still in university. He studied finance during the day and handled small trading deals at night, refusing to let his mother Margaret see how close they came to losing their home. She now lived comfortably because of him, but she never forgot the hardship, and she constantly reminded him that stability mattered more than emotions. His younger brother Pascal was the opposite, charming, impulsive, and allergic to discipline. Kingsley paid his debts more times than he could count, hoping maturity would eventually arrive. That evening, exhausted from work and family responsibility, Kingsley skipped his usual executive dinner and walked into a small cafe simply because it was quiet. He wanted 5 minutes without expectations. He had no idea the decision would alter every part of his future. The cafe was nearly empty when Kingsley stepped inside, carrying nothing but his briefcase and the weight of unfinished decisions. Cynthia moved quickly behind the counter, trying to remember the long list of orders printed on the wall. She had been working there only a few days, and every customer still made her slightly nervous. When he approached, she noticed his tired eyes first, not his clothes, not his watch, just the exhaustion. She reached for a cup while asking for his order, but her sleeve brushed against her cup of hot coffee sitting too close to the edge. The liquid spilled straight onto his briefcase before either of them reacted. The sound of her apology came instantly, rushed and genuine. Kingsley opened the case, expecting ruined documents, yet instead of anger he saw her panic, the kind that had no calculation behind it. They spent the next several minutes drying papers together at a nearby table. The contract pages survived, slightly wrinkled but readable. Kingsley surprised himself by laughing quietly, saying it was the least aggressive meeting he'd had all week. Cynthia offered him a free drink, and he stayed longer than intended, talking about ordinary things neither usually had time for. When he finally left, the silence of his car felt heavier than before, as if he had accidentally stepped into a calmer world he didn't know he needed. 2 evenings later, a sudden storm swept across the city just as most offices were closing. Kingsley left work later than usual, carrying a stack of reports he planned to review at home. Inside a large shopping complex near the parking structure, the lights flickered once. Then darkness swallowed the building. Emergency alarms sounded softly, and the elevator he had just entered stopped between floors with a hard metallic jolt. Cynthia was already inside, returning from buying groceries after her shift. For a moment neither recognized the other in the dim red emergency light. Then her voice broke the silence, cautious but familiar. Kingsley exhaled, almost relieved to hear someone he knew, even slightly. With no signal and no clear idea how long the outage would last, they leaned against opposite walls and began talking simply to fill the waiting time. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour. Without distractions, they spoke honestly about expectations, pressure, and how strange adulthood felt compared to childhood plans. Kingsley admitted he rarely rested because too many people depended on him. Cynthia confessed she feared being valued for the wrong reasons. In the quiet metal box, neither hid titles, money, or background, only conversation. When power finally returned and the doors opened, both stepped out carrying a feeling they could not easily name, but neither wanted to lose. After the elevator night, Kingsley began visiting the cafe without planning to. Sometimes he ordered coffee, other times nothing at all, just sitting by the window while finishing small tasks on his laptop. Cynthia noticed the pattern but never mentioned it. Their conversations slowly shifted from polite exchanges to familiar routines, short jokes, shared observations about customers, and quiet comfort in each other's presence. Through Cynthia, Kingsley met Olivia Carter, the pastry chef who treated the kitchen like an art studio, and Leo Grant, a street violinist who played outside the cafe every evening regardless of weather. They spoke freely around Cynthia because they believed she lived a simple life like theirs. Kingsley found himself listening more than talking, a rare change from boardrooms where he always led discussions. One evening after closing, the 4 of them shared leftover pastries on the curb while Leo played a soft melody. No contracts, no negotiations, no expectations, just ordinary company. Kingsley realized he had never experienced friendships without advantage attached. Cynthia watched him laugh openly for the first time and felt certain she had made the right decision leaving her wealthy world. Neither noticed how naturally their lives were beginning to connect. Their visits turned into shared walks home. Kingsley adjusted his schedule without admitting it, finishing work earlier just to reach the cafe before closing. Cynthia pretended not to notice but always slowed her steps so they would leave together. The city felt different at night, quieter, honest, and conversations flowed easier away from other people's expectations. They spoke about small dreams instead of achievements. Kingsley mentioned wanting a home that felt peaceful rather than impressive. Cynthia talked about opening a reading space for children someday, somewhere welcoming and simple. Neither revealed the scale of what they actually could afford. For the first time, Kingsley enjoyed being seen as just a man, not a provider or decision-maker. One night a light rain began halfway through their walk. They stood under a bus stop shelter, laughing at how unprepared they were. Kingsley offered his jacket. Cynthia refused, then accepted when the rain grew heavier. The moment lingered quietly, comfortable rather than dramatic. By the time the rain slowed, something unspoken had settled between them, not sudden passion, but steady affection neither felt the need to question. Kingsley mentioned Cynthia during a family dinner without thinking much of it. His mother Margaret listened carefully, asking practical questions, her work, her family, her stability. The answers sounded ordinary, and that worried her more than wealth ever would. She had endured years of hardship and believed security came only from calculated choices. To her, love was safest when supported by visible structure. Pascal, however, reacted differently. He teased Kingsley for sounding calmer lately, noting the change in his tone whenever Cynthia's name appeared. Unlike their mother, Pascal liked unpredictability and encouraged him to follow what felt genuine for once. The conversation ended without resolution, but Margaret's quiet disapproval lingered in Kingsley's mind longer than he admitted. Elsewhere, Victor Benson had already discovered everything. He watched discreetly from distance, background checks, daily patterns, and Kingsley's history of responsibility. Instead of interfering, he chose patience. If Kingsley valued Cynthia without knowing her status, then the feeling was real. Cynthia remained unaware her father observed every step, and Kingsley remained unaware his ordinary relationship was being measured by a billionaire who wanted proof of sincerity rather than promises. A week later, Kingsley asked Cynthia to meet him somewhere different from their usual places. It was not a restaurant or a scenic location, just a quiet public library shortly before closing hours. The reading tables were nearly empty, and the soft turning of pages created a calm he preferred over grand gestures. Cynthia arrived curious, noticing his unusual nervousness. He spoke simply. No rehearsed speech, no dramatic declarations. He told her life felt less heavy since meeting her, that conversations with her were the only ones not connected to expectations. Then he placed a small ring box on the table, almost carefully, as if afraid the moment might break if rushed. He admitted he could not promise perfection, only effort and honesty. Cynthia stared at the ring for several seconds before answering. She had feared the day someone would propose because acceptance meant risking truth about her identity. Yet the sincerity in his voice removed calculation from her thoughts. She said yes quietly, not because of the ring, but because for the first time she believed someone chose her presence, not her background. Around them, the library remained silent, holding a promise neither fully understood the weight of yet. Their wedding took place at a small civil registry office on a mild morning. No decorated halls, no press, no extended guest lists. Olivia signed as Cynthia's witness, while Pascal insisted on standing beside his brother despite Margaret's visible hesitation. Kingsley wore a simple suit he already owned, and Cynthia chose a plain white dress she bought herself. The ceremony lasted less than 15 minutes, yet the calm sincerity of it stayed with them longer than any grand event could have. Afterward they shared lunch at a quiet diner nearby. Pascal joked constantly, Olivia took too many photos, and Kingsley seemed lighter than he had in years. Margaret remained polite but distant, studying Cynthia with protective caution rather than warmth. Cynthia noticed but accepted it patiently, believing time and consistency would soften her mother-in-law's doubts. That evening they moved into a modest apartment Kingsley selected intentionally, comfortable but not extravagant. They unpacked together, arguing playfully about where furniture should go, laughing when they realized neither owned many household items. As night settled, the space felt unfinished yet peaceful. For both of them, happiness arrived not through luxury, but through the quiet understanding that they had chosen each other without influence. Married life settled into routines faster than either expected. Mornings began with hurried breakfasts that rarely looked like the recipes Cynthia attempted to follow. Kingsley pretended to enjoy every experiment anyway, even the ones that clearly failed. Evenings were calmer, shared meals, short walks, and small conversations about ordinary events rather than business strategies or social expectations. Weekends became their favorite time. They visited street markets, browsed second-hand bookstores, and sometimes listened to Leo play music while Olivia closed the cafe. Kingsley discovered he liked simple schedules more than corporate dinners. Cynthia kept her identity hidden carefully, managing small personal accounts instead of touching her family wealth, determined their life would remain genuine. At night they spoke about future plans, especially children. They imagined teaching them patience, kindness, and independence, the values both felt shaped their lives differently. Nothing felt urgent yet, only hopeful. Those months became the quiet center of their relationship, the period they would both remember later as the time when happiness existed without complication. Work gradually demanded more of Kingsley's time. The expansion contract he signed months earlier began entering its critical phase, bringing constant meetings and late decisions that could not be postponed. He left earlier in the mornings and returned long after dinner most nights, often carrying files he continued reviewing even while speaking to Cynthia. At first she adjusted easily, leaving meals covered on the table and reminding herself responsibility was part of who he was. But conversations shortened into updates rather than shared thoughts. When she asked about his day, his answers became brief summaries. He was not unkind, only distracted, his mind occupied by numbers and risks he rarely explained in detail. Weeks passed and silence slowly replaced routine laughter. Kingsley noticed the change, but believed it temporary, something that would resolve once the project stabilized. Cynthia, meanwhile, told herself patience mattered more than attention. Neither realized distance rarely appears suddenly. It grows quietly between good intentions, unnoticed until closeness feels unfamiliar. They began trying for a child with quiet excitement, turning calendars into hopeful plans. At first it felt natural, something that would happen in time. Months passed gently, then carefully, then anxiously. Each unsuccessful result created silence neither wanted to acknowledge. Kingsley reassured her often, but worry slowly replaced confidence in the apartment. Margaret's visits became sharper. She asked questions disguised as concern, suggesting medical checks and traditional remedies in the same breath. Eventually her patience faded into blame, spoken softly but clearly enough to wound. Cynthia endured it politely, refusing to argue out of respect, yet the words lingered after each visit long into the night. Kingsley tried to balance loyalty and fairness, but pressure pulled him thin. He told himself his mother feared for their future, not wishing to hurt Cynthia. Still, tension settled over the home, not loud arguments, but careful conversations where both measured every word. What once felt effortless now required reassurance, neither fully knew how to give any more. The company gained a new investor representative, Sharon Jonathan. She arrived confident, observant, and unusually attentive to details others ignored. During meetings she spoke little at first, choosing instead to watch how people reacted under pressure. Kingsley noticed her professionalism. She noticed his constant responsibility. She began requesting private briefings to understand financial projections more clearly. The conversations stayed formal, focused on numbers and strategy, yet she subtly shifted topics toward personal workload and leadership stress. She praised his discipline, something he rarely heard outside performance reviews. Gradually, he relaxed in discussions with her more than with his own executives. Outside the office, Cynthia felt the growing gap without knowing its source. Kingsley returned home later, explaining investor negotiations demanded extra hours. The explanation was true, but incomplete. Sharon never crossed obvious boundaries, she only positioned herself as the person who understood the pressure he carried daily. And understanding can feel dangerously similar to comfort when someone is already tired. Late meetings became routine, and Sharon remained the last person in the conference room almost every night. She never behaved inappropriately. Instead she listened, something Kingsley had been missing without realizing it. She encouraged him to speak about company burdens he avoided bringing home, agreeing with his frustrations and validating decisions others questioned. The relief of being understood slowly replaced his caution. At home, Cynthia noticed conversations turning mechanical. Kingsley answered kindly but without depth, often checking messages between sentences. She asked if work was overwhelming. He said yes and promised that it would ease soon. She chose trust over suspicion, believing marriage required patience during difficult seasons. Meanwhile, Sharon planted quiet doubts. She suggested constant stress affected family stability, asking whether Cynthia truly supported the responsibility he carried. The questions sounded harmless yet lingered in his thoughts long after meetings ended. Nothing inappropriate had happened, but emotional distance had already formed, and distance, once created, rarely stays empty for long. The tension finally surfaced during a quiet evening that began without conflict. Cynthia had prepared dinner earlier than usual, hoping they could talk properly after weeks of rushed conversations. Kingsley arrived late again, visibly tired, and barely touched the food before opening his laptop. She asked gently if they could spend one night without work. The request sounded simple, yet it met a mind already strained by pressure and suggestion. Words that should have been careful became defensive. He mentioned responsibility, expectations, and the future he feared might never feel stable. Then subject they had both avoided emerged: children. Influenced by his mother's repeated remarks and Sharon's subtle comments, he spoke harshly about uncertainty and the possibility that their marriage lacked what he needed for long-term peace. Cynthia remained still, hurt but composed. When he suggested separation, she did not argue or plead. She packed quietly the next morning and left the apartment as calmly as she had once entered it. Neither knew she was already pregnant. The door closed without anger, only a heavy finality neither fully understood yet. Cynthia moved into a quiet furnished apartment arranged through a private contact her father trusted. She avoided familiar places, keeping distance while adjusting to sudden silence. Days passed in practical tasks, updating personal documents, reorganizing finances she had long ignored, and deciding how to live independently again without the shared routines she had grown used to. During a routine medical visit meant only to restore her health after weeks of stress, she received unexpected news. The doctor spoke calmly, but the meaning settled slowly: she was pregnant. For several minutes she said nothing, absorbing the reality alone in the consultation room. The life she and Kingsley once hoped for now existed, yet the marriage did not. She chose not to contact him. Instead, she informed her father and quietly resumed her true identity within the family company, not publicly but through controlled management decisions. The child would grow in stability, not conflict. For the first time since leaving home months earlier, Cynthia accepted both sides of her life, the woman seeking sincerity in the areas capable of providing security, and began preparing for motherhood privately. For a while after the separation, Kingsley believed he had made a practical decision. Work filled every hour, and Sharon remained constantly present, helping him manage investor expectations and complicated authorizations. She requested temporary access permissions to handle urgent transfers while he focused on negotiations. Trust, once given repeatedly, stopped feeling risky. The discovery came quietly. An internal audit flagged unusual transactions routed through accounts bearing his approval credentials. At first he assumed accounting error, but the amounts multiplied, stretching beyond explanation. By the time investigators traced the authorizations, Sharon had already resigned that morning citing personal travel, and disappeared. Legal notices followed quickly. Investors demanded repayment, contracts collapsed, and the board removed him to protect the company. Within weeks his reputation dissolved into headlines he avoided reading. The apartment, the car, and nearly every asset went toward settling debt. For the first time since youth, Kingsley faced life without status, realizing too late that the voice he trusted had carefully guided his fall. Months later, Kingsley wore a uniform instead of a suit. The airport job required no reputation, only punctuality and endurance, guiding passengers, scanning tickets, lifting luggage when needed. At first every instruction felt unfamiliar, but routine eventually replaced embarrassment. Most travelers never noticed him long enough to judge, which strangely brought relief. He rented a small room near the transit line and avoided former contacts. Margaret visited occasionally, her disappointment softened into quiet concern now that consequences were real. Pascal, unusually serious, found temporary work and helped repay remaining debts. Life had narrowed to survival, yet the simplicity forced reflection he once ignored. One afternoon a private jet requested ground assistance. Procedures were the same regardless of passenger status, so he approached without interest. The cabin door opened, and a familiar voice thanked the crew softly. He looked up, and recognition struck before thought. Cynthia stepped onto the runway holding a small child, composed and distant, as if the years between them had created an unbridgeable space in a single moment. Kingsley froze beside the service vehicle, the noise of the runway fading into a dull background hum. Cynthia walked forward calmly, speaking to an assistant about luggage arrangements while holding the child close against her shoulder. Her appearance carried quiet confidence, not extravagant, simply assured. He struggled to reconcile the woman before him with the one who once cooked late dinners in a small apartment. When she finally noticed him, her steps paused only briefly before continuing. There was no visible shock in her expression, only recognition carefully contained. Kingsley forced himself to approach, professionalism failing under emotion. His voice came out lower than intended as he asked the question forming before he could stop it, whose child she was carrying. Cynthia met his eyes steadily. She did not raise her voice or hesitate. She answered plainly that the child was his. The words settled heavier than accusation ever could. Around them workers continued routine tasks, unaware that a life had shifted in a single sentence. Kingsley stood unable to respond, realizing the future he once dismissed had existed all along without him. For a long moment he said nothing. The child stirred slightly in Cynthia's arms, small fingers gripping the edge of her coat. Kingsley's composure broke into quiet regret as he asked why she never told him. Cynthia answered calmly that she learned about the pregnancy after the divorce, and by then his decision had already been clear. She chose stability instead of reopening a door he had firmly closed. He apologized, not hurriedly, but carefully, acknowledging every mistake without excuses. He spoke about pride, pressure, and how easily he trusted the wrong voice while ignoring the one that mattered. Cynthia listened without interrupting. When he finally asked if they could try again, she shook her head gently. Forgiveness and restoration were different things. She allowed him to hold the child briefly, explaining he could be part of the child's life if he chose responsibility rather than promises. Then her assistant called her toward the waiting car. Kingsley watched her leave, understanding some losses cannot be reversed. Yet as he returned to his duties, he felt a different resolve, not to recover the past, but to build a future honestly, starting from exactly where he stood. As this story comes to an end, remember that behind every luxury lies a truth few ever see. If this story moved you, support the channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Until the next unforgettable true story, stay inspired and stay curious.